Hi everyone, welcome. So today we're talking about Traveler's Notebook inserts, and I'm going to show you my pen and paint test results for all the brands that I have tried. I will, as per usual, put links in the description in case you might find something that you would like to get for yourself or a gift for someone else. And I will also put timestamps in the first pinned comment if you'd like to jump back and forth between the brands. We're going to go in alphabetical order, and I don't know why I don't have any inserts from A to E, but the first one is Fabriano. And this is actually made as an A5 insert. I don't think they have them in standard size. I bought this at Joann Fabric and then I cut it myself. If you take it to a place like Staples or Office Depot or somewhere that has a professional cutting system, they'll give you a nice clean result, usually for a nominal fee, but I decided to just do this one myself as I was testing out the paper. So Fabriano EcoQua is FSC certified, so it's eco-friendly, it's made in Italy. And I'm going to show you here that the pen test that I did on this notebook is pretty much the same as I've done in all the others. They vary a little bit, but for the most part, I'm always testing a pigment-based brush pen, a gel pen like a Uniball Signo, Papermate Flare, Pilot G2, a Sharpie pen and a Sharpie marker, a Marvy Artist marker, which is pigment-based, a Pilot Varsity fountain pen, a Zebra Mildliner highlighter, a Faber-Castell Pitt artist drawing pen, and then some watercolors. And I usually try to pick a brand that is going to be a little bit more heavily dye-based and more likely to bleed through, as well as maybe an artist quality brand that is more highly pigmented and less likely to bleed through. So that's my test on pretty much all of these. And when you flip this one over for the Fabriano EcoQua, you'll see that the only thing that truly bleeds through is a Sharpie. So if we go more in depth here, you'll see that the Sharpie marker, Sharpie fine point, bleeds straight through, and that's common for most journals and notebooks, so that doesn't put me off in the slightest. Everything else just has a little bit of ghosting. There's no bleed through at all from the fountain pen or the gel pens or the brush pens or even the paint. With the paint, you can see that I definitely used like more of a red color on the top, and I used a darker color on the bottom, but you can't tell what I painted. You can't see specifics. And I didn't have any trouble with the paper pilling, so that was a plus. When we look back here at the fountain pen, the question is, did it feather? And the answer is no. There's no feathering with the Pilot Varsity fountain pen. I did make a note as I was testing this that the paper is ice cream paper smooth. I've talked about this before. If you like something like Apica or Rhodia that has a really smooth finish, kind of like the Zamboni has just been across the ice rink, then you might like this paper. I personally didn't like it because I like a little bit more tooth to my paper. I don't like it when I feel like my pen is skating across the notebook without me. But a lot of people prize that because it shows kind of the features of inks really well. So it's a decision that you get to make yourself, but this is the result from the Fabriano EcoQua. All right, next we have, let's see what this is. This is the Midori MD paper in a Traveler's Company number 001 insert. I was using this in 2020, and you can see here that I did, again, watercolors, most of my pens and markers. This one I even used some stamps on to see how a dye-based stamp worked as compared to a pigment-based stamp. These inserts are available in multiple formats. There's ruled and dot grid and blank and square grid. The Traveler's Company system is just wonderful, and one of the things that I really like about their inserts is that the covers are not particularly thick, so they don't take up a ton of room in your traveler's notebook. Sometimes you can squeeze in an extra notebook because these covers are a little bit thinner. Anyway, they're just a nice system. And that Travelers Company system uses for like the 001, 2, 3, those first couple inserts, it uses Midori MD paper. And here are the results, and you'll see that the only thing that truly bleeds through again is that Sharpie, that juicy brand new Sharpie fine point marker. The stamps were pretty good. The pigment-based stamp did better than the dye-based as far as ghosting, but there's no bleed through other than that Sharpie. It's really impressive. You can see that I used red and then a darker color, and then you can tell that I used green for the watercolors. I had a Pentel Fude Touch brush pen, and you can tell that I used red. You can kind of see what I wrote, but no bleeding. And that seems to be, for a lot of us, kind of the benchmark. We don't care if it ghosts as long as it doesn't bleed through. You can use both sides of the paper, because as you start using these in practice, this ghosting kind of just fades into the background. When you start writing on your next page, you're not going to notice this very much. So I personally, and a lot of people out there who use Travelers Notebooks, are fine with some ghosting. So there you go, ghosting, but the only bleed through is the Sharpie. Now let's look at the fountain pen. This is the Pilot Varsity, and there is no feathering whatsoever. So in general, I've found that the Midori Traveler's Notebook inserts are probably my favorite overall, but they're also more expensive than a lot of the other options. They're also not reported to be eco-friendly in any way. So let's see if we can find some other alternatives. Okay, the next one is also Midori MD, but this was a notebook, which was A5 size, and I took it to Staples and I had them cut it for me. So this one is nice and smooth, nice clean cut. Then I rounded the corners with a Carl corner rounder. I talk about these a lot. It can go one cardstock cover at a time and then several insert pages at a time. That's how it's happy. It doesn't like to have just one insert page. It will jam if you do that. You need to give it a little bit. This is like a industrial strength little corner rounder. I've had this for about 20 years and it's still working just fine. So put a link to this down below. All right, so this is the Midori MD Notebook instead of the Travelers Company version. And I did a couple of different pen tests, but here's the one that's the closest to what we've been comparing. So again, all the same pens and markers. And when you flip this over, you'll see that, again, the only thing that truly bled through was the Sharpie. Ghosting from everything else, no bleeding. This paint came close to bleeding, but it's because it's of all my watercolors, this is the one specific color that is most likely to bleed. It's from Mei Liang, Pretty Excellent, and there's a color that's like a purple color that for some reason, it's just, if you're gonna see bleed through, it's gonna be that one color out of the hundreds and hundreds of others that I have. So I was happy that if that one didn't bleed through, pretty much nothing else is going to bleed through. Let's look at the fountain pen here. This is the Pilot Varsity fountain pen, and I do not see any feathering whatsoever. Now, one thing to consider with the Midori MD paper is that it does take a little bit longer to dry than some of the other alternatives. So I did find that when I was testing smearing, it was a little more likely to smear, and some of my paints were a little bit more likely to get some bronzing, where they end up a little bit shiny when you paint them in full mass tone without using enough water. So just heads up on that. It is a very smooth paper, and you might end up with some shine. And a lot of fountain pen users love that shine. It's a feature. For me, it's a little bit of a drawback. It's why I tend to prefer, spoiler alert, I tend to prefer Wanderings because it's a little toothier and it dries faster. All right, next one is from Moleskine, and you're saying Moleskine doesn't make a Traveler's Notebook insert in standard size, and you're correct. So this was a Moleskine Cahier, large size. So it came out a little bit farther like this, and I cut this myself. So this is a home trim. I don't necessarily recommend home trims unless you like kind of the artfulness of having them really messy. It looks like you cut your own hair. Some people do cut their own hair and they do a fantastic job. I am not one of those people. Cutting my hair looks like I cut my traveler's notebooks myself. So I personally would probably take this to Staples or Office Depot next time. But let's look at the paper. So Moleskine is tricky. This piece of paper is not representative of everything that Moleskine offers. It tends to make a difference where your notebook was made, and it tends to make a difference what batch it is or what product line it is. I've found that the Cahiers do the worst. I've found that the just regular notebooks like a Moleskine Expanded with ruled lines, those don't do very well. I have found that the daily Moleskines, the hardcover dailies, they tend to take more pens, inks, and watercolors. I don't know why. They market them all as 70 GSM paper. They say they're all the same thing, but they're not. So this is a Cahier from a couple years ago. Same pens and markers. Let's flip the side here. And you can see that bleed through coming through with the watercolors. You can see the bleed through with the Sharpie. You can see, I think this is the Pilot Varsity. Yep, Pilot Varsity fountain pen bled straight through. What's this up here? 1, 2, 3 down. Pilot Precise Grip. That's a rollerball pen that I like for journaling because it has such a comfy grip. Bled straight through. There's not that much ghosting from the things that don't bleed, but the things that do bleed come right through. And the other problem for me with Moleskine is that you say, well, I can use my gel pens. Well, they won't bleed through, but they smear. They take a long, long, long time to dry on this paper. So this is definitely not the most versatile choice. However, Moleskine paper is FSC certified, so it is eco-friendly. Okay, next we have something called Newestor or September leather. It kind of depends on where you order it or what the seller is. I'm not quite sure how the companies are related, but often I will order the listing and the title will say Newestor, and then when I receive it, the packaging says September leather, and that's common. So these are traveler's notebook inserts. They're actually made to be, and they have a stapled binding. And if we open this up, here's the test, again about the same entries as all the others. This one is 100 GSM, 64 pages. I don't think there's anything eco-friendly about these. They haven't mentioned it. When I turn the page here, you'll see that the only thing that truly bleeds through is that Sharpie fine point marker. Comes in loud and clear, but nothing else. Everything else barely has any ghosting at all. In fact, the watercolors, I can't tell, that I used red versus a darker color. Yeah, very, very good quality as far as lack of bleed through, lack of ghosting, just the Sharpie. If we look at the Pilot Varsity fountain pen, I don't see any feathering. That may vary batch to batch, but on this batch, I don't see any feathering. I do see something that happens occasionally in notebooks, and that is, this is a ruled notebook, 7mm rule, and the watercolor from Mei Liang stopped right on a line, as if the ink, which might be petroleum-based, is somehow repelling the watercolors. I've had that happen with several other brands, and it's something to take note of. It didn't do it with my White Nights watercolors. It did do it with my Mei Liang watercolors. And then my other knock on the Newestor or September leather is that, again, it is ice cream paper smooth. If you like that, go for it. I'm happy for you. I don't like how smooth this is. I need some tooth. So that's something to consider when you're comparing these. All right, next one. This is from Paper House Productions. And Paper House over the years has had some really pretty themed notebooks. This one is Tolkien's quote, "Not all those who wander are lost." And it has a pretty gold foil. Okay, so I don't know if they necessarily make these anymore, but sometimes you'll find them on sale in various places. So if I can find them still out there, I'll put a link in the description. But here I've tried most of my pens and markers, several kinds of paints, and the result here is that the Sharpies bleed very clearly, as you can see that. Here's the Sharpie fine point, and then this is a Sharpie ultra fine above it, but nothing else. Everything else just has a little bit of ghosting. With the paint, I can definitely see that I used like a purple, a red, and a blue, clear as day. I can tell with this Pentel Fude Touch brush pen, I can tell that I used pink or red, but there's no bleeding. I can write, I can paint on the back side of the page, and as long as I'm not going to be scanning my work, if I'm just journaling, there's no problem with using both sides. Just steer clear of the Sharpies. This paper has a little bit of tooth, like just right. All right, that's Paper House Productions. Next, we have one called, I think these are Paper Junkie. So these were in this offer on, I think it was Amazon, and I think it was like you got 20 notebooks for a ridiculously low price, and I had to try them. They are not eco-friendly at all. The lines are so bold that when you write, it's okay as you're writing, but when you go back to reread what you wrote, those lines are really intrusive, I think. The paper is not ecru, it's not like just off-white, it's like that blue-gray white, if that makes sense, on the color spectrum. And it's okay as far as bleed through. The only thing you see bleeding would be a Sharpie, and then also what's right above that, a Pentel Fude Touch brush pen, which is dye-based, did have a little bit of trouble. Everything else, no problem, except this is a Pilot Varsity fountain pen, and I noted that it was getting dry. This is not juicy at this point. It's not putting down a lot of ink. And I did see some dots of bleed through. And then on this side, I don't see any feathering. It's just the dots of bleed through. So mileage may vary with fountain pens with the Paper Junkie. It's just a very, very different kind of insert than all the others. All the others tend to be like true white or leaning a little bit to the cream side. All of the others have very kind of faint lines and dot grids and square grids, just to have it there when you need it, and then it kind of fades in the background when you don't. Paper Junkie, no. You get that gray, blue, kind of white. You get bold lines, but they're very inexpensive, and you can use anything except Sharpies, dye-based brush pens, and fountain pens. You're good with pigment-based brush pens, you're good with most paints, and you're good with gel pens, etc. Pencils, of course. So, again, totally depends on what you're using your traveler's notebook for. I didn't enjoy these. Next is just a simple piece of paper, and that's because when I cut down Stalogy notebooks to use as inserts, I didn't do pen tests in the back. I always do pen tests on the paper, like before I cut it down, or, I mean, at this point I think I've been through 8 or 9 Stalogies, so I've got several pieces of paper flying around there with my pen tests, and that's what one of these is. It's from a binder where I keep all my paper tests. And you'll see here that Stalogy is 52 GSM supposedly. I think it feels more like 60-ish. It's similar to Tomoe River paper in that you get that crinkle sound, that Bible paper thin paper. You get 368 pages in a full-size Stalogy. That's a lot of journaling material, right? But what's different from Tomoe River to Stalogy is that Stalogy dries faster. It's like a drier paper with just a tiny bit more tooth than Tomoe River. So Stalogy is one of my favorites, even though it doesn't fare very well in this test. I'm putting it against a white background because this desk is so dark that it kind of throws off the test. This is what it would look like against the dark background when I put it on the white, as if you were using the notebook and you have the next page behind it. You can see there's more ghosting. Here's the Sharpie fine point marker. It bleeds through. Here's, let's see, is this, I think that's a dye-based stamp. It doesn't bleed, but it's pretty close to it. This is a pigment-based stamp, no problem, just ghosting. Pentel Fude Touch brush pen, Marvy artist marker. Here's the Pilot Varsity fountain pen. This is my normal gel pen, my normal brush pen, and here are watercolors. You can tell I used red, you can tell I used a darker color. Can't tell what I painted. So with Stalogy, I have found that once you start using it, that ghosting is not really noticeable. I've found that I'm able to get away with fountain pens. There's no feathering whatsoever, and with the Pilot Varsity, there's no bleed through. The thing that holds me back from using a Stalogy all the time is that watercolors tend to buckle the page to the point that like it doesn't just have like a waffle effect, it actually shrinks, and sometimes you get these like weird lines where the paper shrinks like that. And then the other thing that happens sometimes with Stalogy, I'm not seeing it with this one, but I've seen it in a lot of my others, is that the ink that's used to make the grid can make that watercolor kind of stop on a dime right on the line, as I showed you in one of the other examples. So I've found that when I do use a Stalogy, I prefer now to use the plain version. That's so great that they've come out with plain. When I use a Stalogy, I take it to Staples and have them cut it down for me so that I get a nice clean cut. And when I use a Stalogy, I don't use it for anything that I'm going to scan. Because if I were to paint and do hand lettering and be like really artful in my journaling on this side of the page, then when I flip it over to this side and do more, you're gonna see that ghosting come through on the scan. So if I'm planning to scan my work, I use Wanderings instead, and we'll get to that in a minute. But if you're just writing, if you're just taking notes, if you're just doing research and planning and adding stickers, Stalogy is a fantastic choice. All right, the next one is, Wanderings. This is my favorite. Midori, it's a tie. I like Midori's paper a little bit better. However, it takes longer to dry and it's more expensive. So Wanderings allows me to have one that dries faster and is cheaper. Win-win. So Wanderings is 100 GSM. It's acid-free. You get 60 pages in all of their inserts, and the corners are already rounded for you, which is a plus. And the paper, as you can probably tell from the flip-throughs that we've been doing, the paper is more cream colored than most of the others that I showed you. I have to tell you, once I start using it, I don't notice that. When I'm sitting here doing the comparisons, it's clear as day. But when I have, a stack of Wanderings insert in a traveler's notebook, the cream doesn't bother me at all. Remember that quote from Teddy Roosevelt, "Comparison is the thief of joy." I have joy when I am using my Wanderings inserts. When I start comparing them with others, it's like, oh, it's too creamy. Oh, it's too toothy. But when I'm using it, I love it. And that's what matters. All right, so here's all the pens and markers as per usual. Here's lots of watercolor. We flip it over and you see that there is some bleed through with, of course, the Sharpie fine point, the Sharpie ultra fine point. The Pentel Fude Touch is a dye-based brush pen, like I said, and I guess you'd call it bleed through. It's pretty close. It's heavy, heavy ghosting. And then the one right above that is the Pilot Varsity fountain pen. And there are tiny little dots. So it's going to probably depend on the batch that you get from Wanderings and the pens that you're using. I am not an avid fountain pen user, so I can't test like 6 different inks with 12 different nibs here for you. But I can tell you with the Pilot Varsity, there's a tiny bit of bleed through dots there. Now when I look on the front, there is no feathering whatsoever. So again, mileage may vary with fountain pens, but brush pens that are pigment based, like the Zebra Sensations that I use all the time, you know, your fine liners like a Tombow Mono or a Sakura Pigma, those are fine. Papermate Flare, gel pens, Faber-Castell Artist pens are pigment based, no worries. Marvy Artist is pigment based, no worries. This is a Zig Clean Color brush, fine. Just a tiny bit of ghosting. And then this is the kicker. Look at the watercolor. You can't tell what colors I used. You can't really see the shapes. This paper takes watercolor so well. It makes me wonder if there's cotton content. I don't think there is, but it makes me feel like there might be. I have used these extensively for watercoloring, and I'm so pleased with the way the paint shows up on the paper. There's nothing to give it like that weird cutoff that it does sometimes if there are lines. I choose the blank Wanderings. They dry so quickly. So a lot of times what I'll do is sketch something. If I use a Tombow Mono drawing pen, it dries instantly. I can paint. I can set it aside while I kind of figure out what I'm going to do next, go have a snack, whatever, come back, it is totally dry, and I'm ready to work on the next page. And that's something I can't say about the vast majority of these, and that's why Wanderings wins in my book. Also, Wanderings has sewn binding. Like I said, the corners are already rounded. They come in sets of 3, and you can get them at both Amazon and Etsy. So I'll put a link in the description, so you can shop at Etsy if you would prefer. All right, and then my last 2 are from Webster's Pages, and they have a couple of different styles. This one from Webster's Pages is a little bit heavier paper that's a brighter white. This one from Webster's Pages is a thinner paper that is more ecru. So here they are next to one another. I called this Webster's Pages Notebook with 32 pages, and this one is Webster's Pages Classic Blank. This one had a rounded corner, and the one with the ecru and the thinner paper had a square corner. So hopefully that makes sense as you're shopping. I don't know if these are still produced, but I think sometimes you see them for sale. All right, so all the pens and markers, all the paints, and here's our result. And as you would expect, the thicker paper held up better than the thinner. Look at this. Here's the Sharpie fine point. Here's Mei Liang Pretty Excellent mauve color, super dye-based, tends to bleed through a lot of papers, and it did. But the fountain pen has no feathering. Well, maybe a tiny bit of feathering, but no bleed through at all. And there's like no ghosting from anything else. So all those other pens, markers, drawing pens, highlighters, all good. That's the Webster's Pages notebook with the rounded corner and 32 pages. And they have lots of different styles of covers. And then this is the Webster's Pages thinner paper with square corners. It's what they call Webster's Pages Classic Blank. And wow, that might compete with the Moleskine for the worst performer here. Sharpie bleeds through, fine point and ultra fine. Pilot Varsity fountain pen bleeds through. Papermate Flare almost bleeds through. Pentel Fude Touch dye-based brush pen bleeds. Watercolors, not only the cheaper, but also artist quality. Look at that. And then tons of ghosting from everything else. So not very versatile paper. All right, so the winner, in my opinion, because I do a lot of watercolor, because I want it to dry faster, and because I need it to be more economical, Wanderings is my favorite. And my runner-up is Traveler's Company, those 001, 002, 003 inserts with Midori paper inside. These are made in Japan. The paper is really fantastic. It takes a little bit longer to dry and they're more expensive. That's why I put them second place, but it's kind of neck and neck between these two. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do have an assignment for you in the comments section. Please talk about your favorite inserts. What do you use as your go-to? And what would you like to try? What have you seen out there and thought, oh, I haven't tried that one yet? Because I'm always interested in testing the next new thing. If you found something helpful here, and I hope you did, please click like and subscribe and share and all that good stuff. Come back and see me again for more planning, journaling, art making, anything to do with making your paper look pretty. Enjoy your own journaling journey. Bye-bye.